So we can start our last session, which I hope will be at least the so high interest for everybody. And as a first, we have another report from State Forest Research Institute, Silava. Dana Lībiet, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very glad to be here on this nice winter day. And I will today... today I will speak about another animal species which has actually very much benefited from forest management and from intensive forest management and that. I'm probably not the most likely person to speak about beaver because I'm not a zoologist and I have very little to do with conservation biology and such things. But during the last 3 years I have been coordinating Interreg Baltic Sea region program project, water management in Baltic forests, or BAFF in short, which has 3 main activities. And the third activity is specifically related to the areas affected by beaver activity. And the project aim was, by focusing on drainage issues, riparian forests and beaver dams, to reduce nutrient and mercury export from forestry sites to streams and lakes. It was an Interreg project, which means it was not a scientific study, but it was more like a demonstration project and gathering of existing evidence and giving this evidence further on to forest owners and forest managers. And the idea, this project is going to end very soon, February next year, actually. We had partners from Sweden, Finland, Lithuania, and Poland. In this BAFF project, and the lead partner was Skogsstyrelsen, our Swedish Forest Agency. And for this beaver topic, the main outcome is to be a toolbox for management of areas affected by beaver activity. And this toolbox has to consist of 4 things. Basically, it will be a handbook, it will be a decision support tool, it will be demonstration objects like demonstration areas where we show these management alternatives and demonstrate these decision-making tools. And also we already have organized training courses and we'll do some more training courses in the future. But okay, I will speak a little bit more about that within my presentation. Within this project, and as well as with preparation of this presentation, I had a huge help from my colleague Jānis Ozoliņš, who is responsible for me being here, actually, and also for this beaver topic within the BAFF project. So if I will have some beaver ecology-related questions, and I will take the liberty to forward them to Jānis. He's sitting right here, yeah. Okay. So some words about history of beaver in Latvia. Beaver is a native species, European beaver. Castor feber is a native species for Latvia, but it was exterminated in the 19th century. There is evidence that the last beaver was hunted in some time between 1871 and 1873. Reintroduction was started in 1920s, in 1927, with four animals released in the western part of Latvia, and then it was continued in several more turns. Then 1935, like 2 animals, and 1952, some more animals in some more places all over the territory of Latvia. The population origin was Norway, Belarus, and Russia, Voronezh district, and beaver basically recolonized these habitats quite fast, and there started also some migration within the country, and also across the country borders was started. And you can see with these arrows like this migration routes or migration directions, more or less. The population grew quite fast, and it became a hunted species again in 1980. And it was extensively studied by Dr. Mārtiņš Balodis beaver was his life work, the work of his life, beaver introduction and also beaver studies. There are 2 PhD theses concerning beaver in Latvia, one huge monograph, and approximately 20 scientific papers concerning this species. There are no Canadian beavers in Latvia. No Canadian beavers were ever introduced. There is just only European beavers. It is not the case as it is, for example, in Finland, they have both species, but no, it is not the case in Latvia. Okay, the conservation status of the beaver is such that the beaver is Annex 5 species of the Habitats Directive, which means that member states of European Union must ensure that this species is kept within a favorable conservation status. The reporting has to be done each 6 years. There has to be no hunting during the time of reproduction, and there are some forbidden means of hunting, which is artificial light sources, unselective hunting gear, explosives, smoking out of the dens, use of automatic guns with more than 2 patrons in the magazine. So, as I said already, beaver is a game animal, and it has no hunting limit since 2011. A hunting season lasts from July 15th to April 15th. Population dynamics is, you can see it in this picture. So they're starting from 1992-93, and you can see this very steep increase. There is some decline here, but I would be quite careful with these numbers, because 2011 is the year when this hunting limit was cancelled, and basically we think that these numbers are underestimation. The beaver population is actually higher than that. And probably it is also, this decline has not been so pronounced as it is, but okay. This is statistics. Some funny pictures about the life cycle taken from the book by Dr. Mārtiņš Balodis. So the end of winter, the marriage season, yeah, the little beavers come. Next autumn, the beaver family, the happy family, with the photographer, which is Otter in this case. Some more words about Otter later. And then, of course, into new life, the elder generation of the beaver, of the young beaver generation, has to leave the house and to go in search of some new dwelling place. About population size and environmental capacity. So, as it is that when the size of population has reached this environmental capacity of any specific area, basically no hunting is necessary. For in this case, as many specimens perish as are born. This should be familiar to all of you, this picture. And according to Gatskis, which was a PhD thesis written in 2013, he found out that on average there are 4.6 beavers in one beaver family in Latvia. So it was, before that it was thought it is four animals, but yeah, Gatskis found out that it's basically this family is a little bit larger. Where are we now in terms of the population? Well, probably somewhere here. Still halfway to this environmental or ecological capacity, which could be our possible location here. And why do we think so? Well, one of the reasons is the study done in 1990s, a survey that was carried out to characterize the beaver habitats according to the length of the coastline of large, medium, small rivers, brooks, ditches, channels, and lakes. And within the study, it was actually found out that total environmental capacity of Latvia is one beaver family, which consists of at least 4 specimens per each square kilometer. Or if we would calculate the total numbers, it would be 250,000 beavers, as long as there are sufficient food resources. So it is a way to go yet. So much more space for beavers still. The habitats that beaver favor, there are actually basically 6 habitats that beavers like. It's small natural rivers, large rivers, lakes, straightened rivers, forest drainage systems, and seacoast areas. But 2 that are most favored are straightened rivers. And basically the most favored habitat for beaver is forest drainage systems. So it's like number 1. Why is that? Because basically in Latvian conditions, the enemy number 1 of the beaver is flooding or unexpected changes in the water level, especially within the spring flood. And as this factor is pretty much prevented in the drainage systems, forest drainage systems, it is also understandable that the beavers favor this kind of habitat, and they are really abundant within the drained forests in our country. And of course, from this fact. Also, many trade-offs arise. If we speak about the impact of beaver activity on forestry and infrastructure, it has to be said that in commercial forestry, and I'm speaking about commercial forestry here, I'm not speaking about protected areas designed to protect some species or so. In commercial forestry, the beaver activity, the drainage systems, of course, negatively affects forest growth. The same Gatskis found that this inundation by beaver reduces the growth of conifers substantially. It was the annual increment of Scots pine stands was reduced by 62%, and the annual increment of adjacent spruce stands was reduced by 70%. And also he also estimated the economical losses, which of course dependent on the species, they varied between 124 euros per hectare and 276 euros per hectare. It was in 2009. So, of course, there is the impact also on infrastructure. There can be some forest road damage or rural road damage, and some blockage of waste, like beavers, like they fell by the felling of these trees. The beavers block the motorways sometimes, not so very seldom. In this picture here, you can see this is one of our demonstration areas of the BAFF project with the beaver activity. Basically, here is the ditch, drainage ditch, and here is the beaver dam, which was left intact for several years to see the effects, and afterwards for this dam to be removed and to see the effects on the water quality afterwards. But what we can see here, effects on the forestry, here was the young spruce stand, which was, in this case, it has perished, and yes, there is not much more of alive spruces left. Just a demonstration about these trade-offs like beavers and the commercial forest management. In this case, the drainage in the drained forest areas. About the impact of beaver on biodiversity in the landscape, in general, beaver activity does favor biodiversity in the affected area because it increases habitat heterogeneity and on both temporal and spatial scale. The beaver impoundments increase the landscape level species richness, and in Latvia it is so that beaver especially favors Eurasian otter, which is a protected species, and in a way that it basically favors and provides favorable habitat for the main food source of the otter, which in case of Latvia is frogs. Not fish, probably, how you could think, and it's maybe in other places so, but in Latvia the main food source is frogs. Here you can see also like this Eurasian otter, and its main food source, and also the proof that it is its main food source. A bit more about biodiversity. Some species, however, may be affected adversely. For example, beavers do destroy the habitats of freshwater pearl mussel and also that of thick-shelled river mussel, which are species of high conservation importance. And action plans for the conservation of both these species, they do foresee and emphasize the need to limit the beaver activity in the streams where the populations of these mussels are found. Beaver activity has been identified as the factor that has dramatically reduced the pearl mussel habitats in the western part of Russia, and also negative effects on the survival of large mussels have been found in the USA. Beaver activity significantly alters landscape pattern. In some cases it may be desirable. It may create some visually attractive heterogeneity, but in some cases it may not be desirable even in protected areas. And there has been a study in the nature park Daugavas Loki that flooding, excessive flooding in this case, excessive flooding by beaver, has adversely affected the small river valley ecosystems in this nature park. So, impact on water quality. The beaver activity is usually considered beneficial for downstream water quality, but these effects vary depending on the land use, hydrology, and also other factors. There is a study that found that beaver ponds may help to mitigate accelerated soil erosion and diffuse pollution from intensely managed agricultural landscapes, but these effects, the size of these effects, the extent of these effects do vary depending on the land use and on the site. Beaver-induced hydrological changes significantly alter nutrient cycling pathways. And in this case, the reported results are often controversial and also quite ambiguous. And for example, beaver ponds may act as both as a source and sink for phosphorus, which is one of the nutrients that causes eutrophication of the water bodies and also that of the Baltic Sea. Beaver ponds are potentially important source of methylmercury, which is a potent neurotoxin. Scientists have found that pioneer inundation by beavers can increase the production of methylmercury, and impoundment age, in this case, may be a significant factor influencing these methylation rates. So it is assumed that in the older ponds, these methylation rates are lower than in those that are like these pioneer inundations, that, the dams that are created recently. Why should we worry about the mercury? Why is it an important issue? Well, I have here a picture from Latvia Environment, Geology and Meteorology Center report on water quality. Just forget the brom diphenyl ethers in this part, but just focus on mercury. The green, it is the green. Green is mercury, and the red line is this quality standard. And as you can see that these concentrations of total mercury in perch, in fish, they do exceed the environmental quality threshold value in nearly all stations, in nearly all monitoring stations. At the same time, the values for food safety are not exceeded. Should we be happy with this? No, probably not, because the food safety threshold values are considerably higher. Food safety threshold values are 0.5 milligrams per kilogram, and there has been a recurring discussion that actually these values are too high. So, priority hazardous substance, mercury, as related to the water quality, and its organic form, which is methylmercury, is a potent neurotoxin and highly mobile, and it is prone to accumulate in the trophic chain. Methylation mechanisms are rather complex, and therefore it is comparatively little studied and poorly understood so far. And it is quite a hot topic in the research of also of forest science in Nordic and Baltic countries. So, impact on water quality in relation to the BAFF project. In the BAFF project, we had this demonstration area in the central part of Latvia, in Jaunkalsnava Scientific Research Forests, where we had commercial forest area with a beaver dam. Like here you can see the site. And we removed the beaver dam in August 2017. And we took samples of sediment and of biota and also water samples, and measured there was measured mercury, methylmercury, and also, of course, general chemistry as well. What we found out in this pilot study, you could say, it is not a scientific study, as I said, it is not really a scientific project, but we can get some indications about the trends. What we found out that mercury in biota, in little fish and in snails, it far exceeded the environmental quality standard for fish. In water, methylmercury concentrations in Latvian site were the highest from all studied countries, and also the percentage of methylmercury from the total mercury. It was extremely high in Latvia. Total mercury concentration in the sediments did not appear too high, but also the percentage of methylmercury also in the sediment, it was approximately 3%. Actually, if compared with the data from the literature, it actually indicates quite high methylation rates. So there is some indications about the potential problems or potential challenges for the future, and potential directions for the study that we have also considered, and we have started already to look into the correlations with the content of organic matters and nitrogen, organic matter and nitrogen, and also to see whether there is what are the pathways of microbial activity and the soil soil diversity impact on this methylation processes of mercury. What the relations are there in these topics. So, about water, now about solutions about coexistence. So, is it possible? Is a coexistence possible? Of course, it is possible. Certainly, if we would like to keep the beaver population like halfway to the environmental capacity in all country, when this growth is the largest, so we should count at least 40% of the population. Of course, it is not feasible, but two other solutions might be implemented simultaneously. And one of these solutions is that We could allow beavers to reach the environmental capacity in the places where they do not damage the infrastructure and they do not harm the commercial forests, and thus we could enable this self-regulation of the population there. The other solution is to prevent beavers from settling in the places where they make damage, especially these drained forests, especially these highly productive drained forests, as there is some indication that there is some correlation with the high organic matter content and the methylation rates. So, and we should probably eliminate the animals there completely. So there are places where beavers should be favored, and there are probably places where beavers should be asked to leave. More knowledge on the effects of beaver activity on the water quality is certainly needed. Especially in the light of the climate change, because we do not know these mechanisms. This is quite, as I said, this topic is quite new and quite interesting, and also it is very much related to the development of analytical methods, which is quite rapid right now. So there is a lot of things going on concerning mercury. Of course, we need some aid for decision making if we are to decide whether we should retain the pond or not, and what we should do in general. So BAFF proposes two solutions, two tools within this toolbox. One of these will be, there will be a Baltic Beaver Handbook, which will be called the Beaver as a Resource. It is in preparation. The main editor is Göran Söberg from Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Here you can see the approximate topics of this book, basically. And why do we need yet another beaver book? As you can see, there are a lot of beaver books already, but the Baltic Sea region has specific conditions regarding this species. This very high population density, it poses a little bit different challenges, and therefore we would need a little bit different approach and a little bit more information how to tackle these challenges and how to ensure this sufficient coexistence, especially in our region. So there will be this book. And the second thing that is in preparation is a beaver dam classification tool. So, which will help? It will be actually a survey, a questionnaire with simple yes and no questions and a scoring system, and it will consider all three topics. It will consider nature values, it will consider economics, and it will consider water quality. And weighing all these three factors and different in this point system, we will have the advice whether this dam should be removed or not, or retained in this case. If you would like to have more information about this project, the BAFF project, here is a link to the homepage of Swedish Forest Agency and the project homepage, so you can see that what is going on here. And also we will have a conference in the next year, in the end of next year, in Stockholm, the final conference. Okay, just one more slide. A little bit of off topic, something about art. If we would see which picture gives us more precise information about the object, and I would like to emphasize that art can probably give us some guidance in this, as the details and halftones are quite important in the decision making and in gaining really sufficient knowledge to facilitate a well-informed decision making. And in this regard, probably this picture is, we could hang it on the wall, perhaps, yes, but we would not use it to make conclusions, to draw conclusions about the object, really. So we need probably something more detailed. And this is why scientific evidence is really important, well-grounded scientific evidence, and it refers to controversial results as well, because very often these controversial results, they are caused by the difference of on-site of local factors, and these factors, when in turn carrying out management and when making management decisions, these on-site factors have to be considered as well. So, informed decisions, details, and more knowledge, and dialogue, and coexistence. In this case, coexistence, the beaver and otter. So, thank you.
Questions, please?
Thank you for the presentation. I seriously doubt that the problem about mercury is tackled by just having beaver in the focus. So can you tell the audience more about the sources of mercury in the environment? Because as I'm not a specialist in chemistry, I can't tell where the mercury actually coming from.
Yeah, I'm not a specialist in chemistry as well, but the mercury, the basic source of mercury in Latvia basically is airborne air pollution. The main problem is not mercury as such. There is mercury in the soils, in the sediments, in the water anyway. There is mercury. The greatest problem is the methylation of mercury, which can be caused by different kinds of activities and by different kinds of factors, including anaerobic conditions, which are in turn caused by inundation by beaver, also creation of artificial wetlands. This is also one of the very important sources of mercury, actually, as is found in literature. So the main problem we're talking about is this methylation. It is not only, and of course also management decisions, also management, forest management activities can cause this mercury methylation. Like, for example, driving on wet soils and soil preparation in unsuitable weather and so on. So there is a lot of different factors involved in this. That's the point. It is not mercury as such, it is methylation of mercury. But we see these mercury threshold values, and we see these mercury concentrations in the fish, and yeah, we have spoken also about this with the colleagues from Latvian and Geology and Meteorology Center, and yeah, they are concerned as well. So did I answer your question? Partly. You can ask me afterwards.
More questions, please? Okay, thank you. Now I'm asking again Māris Strasts, and he will tell about, I think, very interesting report, because aspen, I think, is the tree species about which there is a greatest difference between foresters and biologists, what they think. What is aspen in the forest?
Hopefully I will save some time. Oh, did it wrong way. Because this is really very short presentation. And contrary to my previous one, where I was kind of talking on something I know, or at least have been involved for a very long time, this is absolutely the opposite. So I'm in no means a specialist about aspen, and this presentation altogether is more a ThinkPad rather than some story completed. So actually my major interest, my major subject of the interest is black stork, and for black stork this tree species is pretty important. So that's how I became interested in this tree species indirectly. And then the more I was collecting data of my interest regarding black stork, the more diverse they departed from, so to say, official position, both in legislation and also on some forestry people expressing their positions. So I simply decided maybe this is a good opportunity with such an audience to come out with this question and to move it from point zero. So I really asked all possible colleagues to contribute to this, but because of the very short time, not all contributions reached me. So this is mostly my own, and with very significant contribution from Madars Bergmanis about woodpeckers. But there is much more than just that. So, yeah, as I said, black stork is one of the species exploring aspen quite a lot for building nests. And as a background, partly why this concern became even more important than it was. So 40 years as a cutting age was pretty bad already. And then this proposal to reduce this cutting age to 30 was sort of not really understandable. And I put in simply this statement which stands in that piece of legislation in discussion in Latvian, not trying to translate it. You know where to get it. These are documents of Saeima of Latvia. Probably most of you know it anyway. This is just a reminder what is behind this presentation. I'm not going to comment anything on what is there because I have no data to do so. But I'll tell you, so to say, one side of the coin I know pretty well, and I know there are more data on this issue, so maybe this is really something bigger we can discuss in wider audience or more seriously. So most tree species which are good or important for black stork as a nest-holding trees need to become very old in order to become suitable for nest. And I have on this table only individual trees whose age is measured by increment borer. So actually there are no speculations, no taxation data at all. And that is the reason why I have so few oaks. So actually I have only 5 different individual oaks properly measured. 3 of them is a backward calculation after the tree has been cut it down, so you can count how old it was when the stork was breeding there. And I use every single successful breeding season as a separate case. So putting all the, just to make it simple, if bird breeds in a single tree 50 years in a row, in one case, and in another place it breeds just 1 year in that tree, it's clear that this 50-year tree is 50 times more important than the single case. So simply to make them all equal, every single nesting case is considered as a separate unit. And if the tree grows older, it simply adds 1 more year, and that's how it is put together, this data set. And you see that there is a huge difference between cutting age of all trees involved and the average and even minimum and maximum figures of trees storks are breeding in. And that was my first idea or how to formulate that. If the average age of aspen is 100, it is 2.5 times higher than cutting age. That is higher than for any other species. It's twice for pine. This difference is less for other species, but for aspen, this gap is the biggest of all species. And both percent-wise, but also priority-wise, aspen is second most important tree species for black stork in Latvia. I know that situation for the species in general, at least in Europe, it is different because aspen is kind of taking place of oak geographically, where oaks are not growing big enough for stork nests to be built on. Technically, if you look on a tree atlas in Latvia, we have oak as a species distributed in totally all of the country. But you see that oaks are these gray circles and aspens are the blue circles. And you see that this is really almost no overlap between the two in regional sense. So aspen as a nesting tree is supporting stork population in more than 1/3 of the country. So if if there is trouble with this species and it starts missing in the right size and shape, then basically 30% of the country's territory will be no option for black stork to breed. So it is important. And one thing which is brand new in true sense, I just a week ago participated in the 7th International Conference on Black Stork. And these data I will show you, it was the first place where it was presented at all, so it is really completely fresh information. It may sound odd if you have this very old approach that birds and animals have just instincts and nothing else, but they kind of plan their family size depending on the flat size they have, which in this case is nest surface area. And this is based on more than 800 individual measurements during more than 20 years period. So data size is very solid, and this dependency is highly significant. And what it basically means, we have data and observations that if the season appears to be good, or they expect it to have good, they may increase the nest surface to have more space for 4th or 5th chick. But the problem is there are a big number of trees, and this is particularly true for aspen, where it is not possible because the tree is too young or too small. And they have not enough sufficiently good big trees where it can be done. And that means if after many bad seasons, finally there is one good season and they have, so to say, one room flat, there is no improvement, which would be there if the trees would be there. So again, it is important. The tree size itself also is important because these too young and small trees cannot hold these large nests. If we split this average value of an aspen age into 10-year period, so cutting age, and when I got my first tree, which was older than 150 years, I was kind of, oh, maybe this is a huge exception and I don't know what to do with this tree. But it is by no means the only one. And then I started to measure all the increment and details of all these trees, also to understand how big proportion of them are really with holes inside. There are these chimney-type aspens where you hardly get 10 centimeters and then it is big empty space, but these nests are usually very short-lived. And what is interesting, so far there is not a single case when a nest have been fallen down with a stork inside, so they obviously realize a year or two before that the tree have reached critical condition and it is not anymore safe for breeding. And they gave it up. But there are more than half of the trees with very solid age are absolutely intact as far as I can tell from this increment. I'm not chining them down or checking more than just that. And here is some of the older end of the nest aspens, back calculated when they have been starting to grow from increment, also looking which years have been bad, which years are better. And what is really interesting, and you will see in some of the other graphs as well, this annual growth is not related to age of the tree, because one tree had reached its maximum growth speed in age of 170. So it depends really from conditions around the tree more than from the age of the aspen itself. So, and what is very interesting, there are clearly two types of aspen. One is this average, which you can see with a dark blue or purple, whatever color it looks on screen, which grows faster at the beginning, reaches sort of peak of annual increment in age of 30, 40 years, and then slowly goes down. And the other group, and that is exactly probably for the stork nests, the most important group are the trees which the first maybe 100 of years, I don't know, because this possibility to back calculate data, if I have just less than 10 sample size, is still very small, but they grow extremely slowly in the beginning, and they stay almost flat. Nav kaut kāds šitas punkts. Šitas ir punkts. Yeah. So if you look, can you see? Yeah. So they grow first 50, 60 years very slowly, and then start, depending on conditions, and in some years this annual increment may jump very high up. And here you see this dark blue is average value of many trees of the category, and these light ones are two individual trees from this very old group. So the aspect which seems pretty obvious understanding, and when I wanted to check if it is really happening also nowadays, this slow start of the growing, it almost by definition pointed me to one, not problem, but one possible reason why maybe so many aspens are not in good condition in age of 30, 40 years, because I hardly could find a tree A which is in understory, which is not eaten by animal. And I could, similarly like in this statement for the change of legislation, 30 to 100% are damaged, I could say probably 90 to 100% were eaten by browsing animals. And maybe this is the reason why they later are damaged. I don't know, but clearly this is not, but even if it serves like very important source of food for these animals, and if you suddenly remove most of the aspens, or that may influence the total picture. There is another thing which is quite important if we think on these modern problems of CO2 accumulation. At the age of 40 years, this is pretty old aspen. It's not the oldest, and it's not the biggest. Actually, neither of these very old trees are the ones which are really extremely big, because I started to do these increment measurements not from the very beginning of the study, and I'm missing very many trees to be measured. So actually this is only the last couple of 6-7 years when I'm trying to get measurements from every tree. So anyway, in age of 40 years, this is the radius, so it's approximately 110 millimeters, which means 11 centimeters. And if I transform this into diameter and then into volume, it is just 9% of the volume tree is reaching if it reaches this final age. So if you think on accumulation of CO2, that means 90% of potentially stored CO2 goes nowhere if we cut the tree in age of 40 years. 90%. Then this next, so to say, category, which is data from Madars Bergmanis, as you know and understand, that woodpeckers are really the only group of birds which are really interested in pest insects because they eat them. And as a byproduct of their interest, they are making holes to breed for themselves, but then these holes are used by most other hole-dwelling animals, birds, and insects. So actually, in some way, the role of woodpeckers is very similar to the role of beaver in specific environment because they are creating conditions contrary to many other species. And Madars have this sample area where he have been collecting data on woodpecker breeding, nest locations, a lot of other additional data in Ukru-Gārša, which is close to border with Lithuania. So if you remember back that my map I was showing, that is not aspen area. And in this case, that is maybe even more important that if it would be somewhere else, because if you say, okay, there are just aspens around, then what's the priority? They just use what is there. So keep in mind that is forest where aspen is a rather marginal tree. Okay, they are there, but still. And look on these data. So it's totally several hundred woodpecker nests over almost 20-year or more than 20-year period. And the average percentage is higher than 90%. So if we eradicate aspen out of our forests, and they do need certain size of trees because they have to make holes inside, especially the larger woodpeckers like white-backed woodpecker and black woodpecker, all these cavities will not be there because there will be no place where to put them. So that's basically most what I have in this short presentation data, but there are plenty of items which I have not covered. I can simply mention them, that role of aspen in food of the same browsing animals and beaver, and vice versa, so their role in damages to aspen. Role of aspen in as a nest-holding tree to other big birds, not just black stork. It is white-tailed eagle. It was mentioned that it is one of the places where pygmy owl likes to build nest, but basically these are woodpecker holes. Pygmy owl uses holes of greater spotted woodpecker very often. Role of aspen stumps in placement of these large forest-dwelling owls like Ural owl. Symbiosis with mushrooms, just which is of interest for general public. Then associations with plenty of species of good insects. I hope you understand what I mean. And then this matter I mentioned, I'm no expert in CO2 accumulation, but this is something to look upon seriously, because if we do not change really, even in broader approach, attitude towards this accumulation issue, and from just selling quota which are being dealt to on paper, but start really accumulating something, things will never gonna change, not just in Latvia, but in broader sense. So if it is really so useless or uninteresting from pure timber position, how it seems, maybe this alternative or all other values together are are much, much bigger, and it is maybe worthwhile to leave these trees where they are and let them grow, so to say, to compensate a lot of losses in other fields. Look at this tree. So I'm with much less hair, but I have not much changed in my physical dimensions. And unfortunately, this is the only poor quality photograph, unsharp, but I kept it for record. That tree is broken in height of about 2.5 meters, and that trunk is higher than my body in height of 2.5 meters approximately. So I tried to back calculate the size of that aspen. It was between 4.5 and 5 meters in circumference. That is the largest tree I have seen in Latvia in forests, but there are some approaching this dimension. And if you think simply on amount of CO accumulated in that tree, and that is probably, I don't know, 200 years, maybe 150, maybe 250, because there are some very fast-growing aspens who reach size of 1 meter in diameter almost in 100 years' time, which is still pretty solid age, but not comparable with these 180, 175. So I wanted really to raise this question into higher level, and I hope other people will respond. That's it for me.
Thank you for very new information and interesting presentation. Have you have any questions to Maris?
Thank you for presentation. I have one comment and 2 questions. My comment is on the old aspens, is that this is the point where environmental goals and forest owners' goals would meet. They don't conflict there because there is no economic value, and I think many forests are not eager to go after old aspens. So I think this is the way that where our interests meet, since I represent Forest Owners Association. The question is, as we know that if the aspen is the dominant tree in the stand, then it most likely would be harvested. But in your presentation, we saw that the nests are in old aspen, and it is clear that it is in mixed forest, where aspen constitutes probably the minority, apparently, in the stand. Have you considered any way that how to protect these trees so that the big forest, which has reached cutting age, but it is not the objective of a forest owner to harvest it at some point, that forest owner does not feel threatened that this economic value of the property is taken away if there is this nest found, or there are some other threats to forest economic values. I mean, the environmental policy today works in this way that forest owners feel this threat, and especially because of these activities that we have today ongoing, the habitat inventory and the lesser spotted eagle project, forest owners do feel threatened. And so they are eager to not to have these values in the forest. So I think this is the side effect of environmental policy that we have today. And have you considered, do you have any proposals how we can, both goals could be achieved? Forest owner has his or her goals, and so it's not necessary, nobody wants to harvest trees with nests. But the policy today is not working the correct way. And I have read proposals from NGOs that there should be compensation system established better than it is now. But we also know that politicians have said that there will be no more money for compensation, so there needs to be some other solution. Thank you. I will leave my other question was about the increment in very old aspens, but I will leave it maybe for later.
I can answer immediately that second question. Yeah, if you ask whether I can always, I have 40 centimeter increment borer, if I can always reach the center, no. There are cases when it is not possible because the tree is few centimeters too thick. And then actually that's one of the reasons why I started to back calculate these good and bad years, because in some trees are growing faster and some slower. And then if I can back calculate that I'm missing 2 centimeters, it is a speculation how many years are missing, but it is within very short limits. So I would never say if it's just 2 centimeters missing that I'm adding 100 years or just 1. There are limits. So, but these very old trees, none of them have been from that category. So they're actually not the thickest ones. And this oldest, which is, I have this additional, some missing value of the total is some 5 years, but not because I did not reach the center, but because I was a bit aside from the center, so you could see clearly that it is there, and I did not want to bore it twice just to have these 2 extra years exactly. So that's the second question. The first, if that was your question, I'm assuming that you were asking this. The first one is, actually there were many stories rather than just question. If you ask me whether I'm thinking on how to deal with some cutting issues, not very much. Although I am private forest owner myself, but not for myself and not for broader political, but back as a comment to your complaints on the current environmental policy, I would be brave enough to say that this country since independence has never had environmental policy during its entire period, and we are not having Ministry of Environment either. There have been short periods of activities in this field when there have been either small group of people or individual people working at that ministry who have done quite good job, but there is no consistent policy, which is probably behind quite a lot of problems of today. And I actually wanted to add this slide in my first presentation, but then I decided it's not really the subject, so I excluded it. But it was in a period when Latvia started conversation on joining EU, so it was not exactly the year before, but a few years before. I think it was 98 or so. We participated, I was representing then BirdLife International and participated in one international meeting with DG11, so DG Environment currently in Brussels, and discussing on this expansion of European Union subjects, and somehow came to question about Latvian proposals and policy, and then commissioner of that time said that government of Latvia has officially declared that environment is not priority. And so it has been all the time. What comes out, and sometimes not in the best possible way, because you mentioned, I frankly find it excuse me, but I frankly find it pretty quite stupid that people complain about inventory, from which basically should not if you do whatever, agriculture, forestry, you must know what you have. And that's the first thing to do, is to count your cows or measure your field or values in forest, nature, whatever. And then the next thing is what you do with it. That's absolutely different thing, but you must know what you have. And basically, this is not my idea, not formulation. Per Angelstam, whom quite a few of you know also, once said this in one larger conference. Scientists have to give the facts and the information. Conservation is issue of politicians. How much we can afford, how much we want to afford. And if we declare we don't need a single black stork in Latvia, okay, the species will not die out, because from the global perspective, Latvia is not important. If we don't need it here, okay, I maybe will change the place of working because I'm so in love with this species, but that's my problem then. But the big problem is that on one hand, institutions and politicians are mostly just repeating something that somebody else is presenting to them. I don't think many of them think themselves out, all these statements and speeches. We just pretend, oh, we want, oh, there is one pretty rude Russian saying about this, but I won't repeat it and not even mention, but basically, Mārtiņš Balodis was mentioned. I happened to work with him 8 years together, and he was often using also this example in regard to in case of beaver, but this is more general situation. In agriculture, we somehow understand if we have a field of whatever crops and carrots and anything, then we have a field, and here we have a sheep, and here we have cattle. But in forests, somehow people think that you can have sheep, carrots, crops, maize, potatoes on the same spot and have maximum crop from everything. That is not possible. It never will be. So my response to this question or problem, how to the two you mentioned, this habitat inventory and lesser-spotted eagle problem, is a bit two different things. It is, excuse me once more, but it is stupid to be worried about inventory, because if we don't know what we have, the decision-making is absolutely the next step. If it's messed up here by somebody, well, we should stop messing up things. And yeah, I think I have answered more than you asked, and not exactly what you asked, but we can talk about this in detail later and in Latvian if necessary.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have to move further to next report. Thank you. And habitats are already mentioned, and it seems that many people are very afraid about habitat inventories. And I ask, give more insight, what history and what now, Sandra Kauniece.
Hello, dear friends and colleagues. I'm really surprised that you are so many at that time in auditorium, and you are very patient, you are grateful. And what I will tell you, I don't know what you are expecting from my presentation, and maybe it will be not what exactly you expect. And maybe if you have some questions about inventory, project, and so on, I'm so happy that project leader is still here, Iris Mukane, and you will ask her some questions if you are very deeply interested in this project. But what I want to tell you today, today in some presentations, we heard different facts about nature conservation history, slightly about forestry history, and as we start to speak about habitat inventory, it will be nice if we know and remember our history in forest inventories in Latvia. We had some very great projects, and it will be good to know about it. Habitat inventory don't start only today, only last year. It has much longer history. Okay, and at the end, I also will give you some numbers about some provisional results about forest inventory. When we speak about protected forest habitats in Latvia and tools for protections, we sometimes forget that till new forest law in 2000, especially protected forest compartments were separated during forest inventory, where forest management was not allowed. And Maris Trust slightly mentioned like micro-reserves for birds, these compartments, but these compartments were very different, and it's also part of our history in forests. Till 90s, forest habitats as ecosystems were not deeply investigated, and more attention was paid on forestry or to rare species and plant communities. But in the middle of 90s, new approach appeared in forest studies. An idea of natural forest was introduced in Latvia. World Wildlife Fund started a project in Latvia, Natural Forests of Latvia, with several study areas. And the aim of that project, there was several aims. And first was to get information about forest history based on available maps and descriptions. Also investigate natural forest structures, research biologically valuable forests, characteristic species, special and indicator species, and relevance between species and structures. And also recommendations for how to keep biodiversity in forests were prepared, and knowledge was used in following woodland key habitat inventory project. Next, very important project in development of protected habitats idea was Mežsaimniecība project, which takes place in Smiltene Forestry. And in this project, proposals for sustainable forest management and new management approaches, as retention trees, selective cuttings, dead wood creation, were introduced in model territory. As well discussions with foresters and new approaches, confrontation with traditional forest methods. Inventory of biologically valuable forests stands more based on structures. And here is some examples of different forest structures. And this evaluating of forest structures become a basis of biologically valuable forest identification. And this evaluation system with different slightly changes is saved from the first woodland key habitat inventory till today. Here is a definition of wood and key habitat for those who are not so familiar with this concept. And of course, wood and key habitats also, we can say that these are close to natural forests, biologically valuable forests, or forests of high biodiversity. And today, woodland key habitats represent the best part of EU protected habitats. And we still use this idea and this measurement of structures. Woodland key habitats inventory started as a project led by a State Forest Service together with Sweden partners, and from 2000 also together with the company Latvijas Valsts Meži. And special methodology was prepared, which is still actual and still used in inventories of protected habitats. And the first years it was testing, and in 2000 inventory started in all state-owned forests. Till the end of project, more than 27,000 hectares were defined as corresponding to criteria of woodland key habitats or potential woodland key habitats. Woodland key habitat inventory also had quality control as this ongoing mapping project, and this control shows that only about 60% of possible woodland key habitats had been found in inventory. This map was prepared 10 years ago and shows the situation with results of woodland key habitats. This information about results was stored in State Forest Register and owned by State Forest Service, this data at that time. What was happened after woodland key habitat inventory? At first we joined in EU and had some changes in legislation and also protected habitats and Natura 2000 territories we need to designate. Habitats protection become more associated with officially protected territories, but woodland key habitats protection outside Natura 2000 and micro-reserves were based on voluntary protection or some requirements of certification systems. Information about woodland key habitats in forest register was gone. Mapping of woodland key habitats and also biologically valuable forests continue or started in protected territories when there are some management plans are prepared on or some different small projects started. In commercial forests, in state forests, inventory was continued. Results were used for management planning. These results are not, was and are not available for public or for nature conservation policy aims. If we look on situation about forest management, as I say, the forest protection, habitat protection are more based on protected territories. There is data from State Forest Service 2015, and you can see that in this year forestry activities are completely forbidden only in 3.3% of the total area of Latvia forests. I also want to remind situation with forest habitats in Latvia report in 2030 when Latvia as other European Union countries prepare a report about situation with protected habitats and their conservation status. And last year started new project, mapping of EU importance habitat. And goals and tasks of the project are widely told in different seminars and meetings, and I hope and know that many of you know these goals. Main goal to obtain high-level scientifically justified and high detailization level information on nature values of habitats across the country and regard forests in all forests, not only in state forests, but all forests, digitalize data and integrate them into national information systems, and then analyze obtain data and information and use them for better policy. And also in this project there are some other activities like conservation plans for specially protected areas and management plans for protected species. In inventory we used unified methodology and a big number of experts who go on field and did inventory. Last year, this year, and also next year, we have 3 mapping seasons. We used a unified checklist and gather information about habitat. And as I said before, we used the same checklist about forest structures, what was prepared 20 years ago. And we also have quality control on site, but documentally we look through every place, this checklist of habitat, which experts prepared. And some results, these are provisional results about 2070, because about this year we not yet receive any information. And provisional results because we have not yet done control on field. We check only documentally all information, and in the first year bigger emphasis was to look on protected territories, and almost 50% of inventory territories was done in protected, in Natura 2000 or in micro reserves. And when we look on these provisional results, we find provisional results more than 59,000 hectares of different EU habitats, forest habitats. Here is also results about other habitat groups, and I hope you will see and after these presentations also, and look on these numbers more detailed. What kind of habitats we have after this first season? Bigger parts are for wooded dunes and western taiga, and also bog woodlands. Other kinds of habitats are smaller proportion. And there is one slide about owners. 65% of these forest habitats are in state-owned forests, and 7 in municipalities, and 24 in private owners' forests. And keep in mind that about 50% of these habitats are in protected territories, which are protected territories like Natura 2000 or micro reserves. Here is possible to see this proportion, how big territory was planned for inventory in 2070, and in how big territory EU habitats were founded. Forests, grasslands, and bogs also. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Any questions, please? I have a question about this old database of key habitats. Is it really lost, or it could be restored and somewhere it's available still, maybe?
It's question for the State Forest Service. Nature Conservation Agency don't have such data. Are here anybody from State Forest Service?
Now the information is not very precise at the moment because it is quite old, but we have some polygon information, but I really don't know what is about the text information, what is in these habitats, but maybe something we have, of course, but I don't know how much.
Thank you. Then we are going to the last presentation by Viesturs Ķerus. While Viesturs is coming, I would like to remember every who are going tomorrow on field session. Please remember that bus starts 8 o'clock from this building, and we have still 10 free places. So please go to Ilse, and if you are interested to have a place in the bus. And all we meet at 9 o'clock, about 9 o'clock in this forest road across this Kanciems area.
Hello. In a way, it's nice to be the last speaker in this symposium, as it lets me get back to some points that were made already before and in a way summarize this meeting. But what I will try to answer is if the forest policy of Latvia has reached its goal for conservation of biodiversity. And those of you who know me know the obvious answer to come, but let me prove my point. And in the end, I will consider some ideas of what can be improved. So first of all, about the policy itself. This year, we can mark 20 years since a policy, since a Latvian forest policy was adopted. And it's a nice document balancing all the interests in forest management, including nature conservation. And one of its broad goals is conservation of biodiversity at its current, obviously meaning 1998, level. And under this broad goals, there are several other sub-targets and actions, but due to time constraints for making this presentation and speaking to you, I will focus only one of them, which seems the most relevant to this symposium today, is the target that we ensure the conservation of diversity of forest habitats and their species. So 20 years ago, all of this was agreed, and that's that. We went on managing forests, largely forgetting about this document, especially its goals for biodiversity conservation. we don't even know what the then current status of biodiversity was. We have no baseline data to see how good we have implemented this policy. It was 13 years later when someone remembered that this is something we decided on doing back in the end of 1990s. And in the forest law, an article was put that Ministry of Agriculture, as the responsible ministry for forest policy, should report to the Cabinet of Ministers of how we are doing about the implementation of the forest policy, including the conservation of biodiversity. However, in the regulation of Cabinet of Ministers that followed this article in law, the indicators that match the topic of my presentation today, meaning species and habitat diversity, are only two, which is tree species composition and threatened plant and animal species. And there is a report which follows a document I will talk about shortly, which kind of reports what the regulation required. And one of them is threatened species. And from here on, I will mostly focus on birds when I talk about species, not only because I'm an ornithologist, so it's an important thing in this case, but also due to the fact that apart from trees, birds are the taxonomic group with the best data. So this is from the report by Ministry of Agriculture, kind of showing how we are doing with implementation of forest policy in terms of biodiversity. Can you think to yourselves what this tells you? I would argue it tells very little. Exactly. It lets us understand almost nothing. We don't know if we have managed to conserve the biodiversity or not. For example, if the number of threatened species were to increase at some time, is it worse? Is some common species now becoming threatened? Or is it better? Is there some rare species which started breeding in Latvia and we weren't even considering it? Now it's a stable breeder, but a small population is therefore threatened. Information about trees, although comes certain years later than was asked, is actually pretty decent in terms of biodiversity. Sorry to English-speaking listeners, but this is number of trees in a stand. Top pie chart is only canopy trees, and the bottom is all the stands. So at least as a baseline, this would be at least something. So after this, in 2015, guidelines for forestry and related sectors were adopted. And there again, between all those many goals and targets is one small target: forest biodiversity maintained at its current level. And again, what does this mean? Have we abandoned the original goal of maintaining the forest biodiversity at the level of 1998 and now stick to this level of 2015? And now in 2015, do we know what the current level is? I would argue we still mostly don't know. But while this all has been happening, setting of targets and then forgetting about them, the logging intensity has increased hugely in Latvia. And there I have shown the years when both policy documents were adopted, just to put them in the context. And I would say that there are different ways to view the information of logging intensity, because at low levels, I think it's logical to assume that volume harvested is not really a factor to consider when thinking about biodiversity, because it's more the issue of how you harvest trees rather than how much timber you get out of it. But the higher the intensity of logging, the less options you have of going about different ways of doing it. So at some point it's possible to reach a level when the logging intensity is simply incompatible with the targets of biodiversity conservation. And I can't stop wondering if we are already there, maybe. And this was already shown before by Sandrika. It's a situation of, it's a report on habitats of European importance, specifically forests in this case. And as Sandra already showed, all of the habitats in Latvia are in unfavorable status. Most of them have declining trends, meaning decreasing areas, total area in Latvia. So on this respect, on habitat diversity, we have failed miserably, and we are set on continuing to fail, as there is a political agreement now, even before we have done the inventory of habitats, that not all of the habitats should be protected, and that the area that is dedicated to nature conservation should not increase. So it's unsurprising, although this political decision was not made when the report was made, but it's unsurprising that future prospects of these habitats are also rather grim. The situation with species, namely birds in this case, is not that simple, because birds are very diverse, and whatever change takes place in environments, there will be always some winners and some losers. And here I have analyzed 53 forest bird species, and I must admit that during my presentation I have used 3 different sets of forest birds. I won't go into methodological details now, but if it's a special interest for you, then you can ask me later how I came about these lists. You wouldn't call it these 53 strictly forest specialists, but they are species which mostly depend on forests during the breeding season. And about a quarter of them are threatened or near threatened if we use the IUCN criteria, which is also one thing I forgot to mention about a report published by Ministry of Agriculture, because although the regulation requires to use IUCN criteria, I don't know where the data came from, because the source was not indicated in the report, and as far as I know, there has been no publication in Latvia where the species threat status is evaluated according to these criteria. And this information is not final and published yet too. Here I have compared the trends of common birds before the policy was adopted and in modern monitoring period, which Einars told you about. Of course, from scientific point of view, you should be discouraged of comparing trends that were acquired using different methods. As here, for example, a simple way would be to say that 6 forest species that were stable before the policy are declining now. But as the methods were different, you shouldn't make such easy assumptions. That's from the scientific point of view. But from the policy point of view, it might be important to you that before we adopted the policy, we knew there were less declining species, and now we know there are more of them. So obviously there needs something has to be done about it. So these are the 7 declining forest species, a subset of the species Einars showed you before. And as you see, those of you who know birds, most of them are resident species, and only 2 of them are migratory birds. So mostly what happens to these species is depending on what happens here in Latvia. So now I will move on to the possible drivers of these changes, but let me emphasize again, those are possible drivers because I haven't carried out in-depth analysis, and it should be done species by species if we want to have good results. But one of the things that has changed during this period is tree species composition on the whole country together. Here it's a distribution of stands, of forest stands by the dominant tree species. And as we know, the pine forests have decreased in area, and for example, aspen and grey alder forests have increased, which might have some consequences to biodiversity. If we put it mathematically, this would constitute an increase in biodiversity, at least in terms of species, tree species diversity, as the dominance of some species is declining. But another issue which is very important for Latvia is forest fragmentation. And this picture might be a bit hard to grasp, but this here legend refers to the pie charts, which shows that most of Latvia, in the most of Latvia, the forests are already quite poorly connected, and this refers to the map itself and shows that Latvia is one of the countries in Europe with the greatest increase in forest fragmentation or decrease in connectivity, as shown here. But the issue I will deal with in slightly more detail is change in forest age structure. And when normal people talk about forestry, there are mainly two opposing statements. One of them is that the area of forest is increasing and has been increasing for a long time. The other statement is that the old growth forest area is declining. And both of these statements are equally true and false because of both of them are a bit simplified. If we compare the changes in forest, if we compare the age structure of forests in Latvia in 2001 to 2015, we see that the changes don't follow a simple trend. Here I have calculated the change in each of the age groups, and you see that there is huge increase in the youngest end of the forests, meaning clear cuts here, 0 years of age, and young stands up to 20 years of age. And there's a slight increase also in the old end of this distribution, but the decrease is here in the middle part. So both the old forests are increasing and young forests are increasing, although the scale of increase is very different, but it's middle-aged forests that are declining. And I made a very quick and dirty analysis of some birds related to the age of the forest they use. And these are the 21 most common forest birds in Latvia. And therefore, obviously, these are the birds that cope the best with existing forest management. Here I show you the, So I remind you that this part of the forest is, these parts are the ones that are increasing. So as I showed you earlier, the young forest is increasing. hugely, not so much the old end, but for now, which will be important in a while, for now still most of the forest is in that middle part, although it is declining, and this is also where the most of forest used by these 21 species lies. This is one of the reasons why, although some species use forests that is above the median age of forest available, and some species use younger forests, there's in this species groups there's no clear connection between the age of forests they use and the population trends. As you see, many of species are stable, and the two declining species, great spotted woodpecker and tree pipit, are very different in many ways, which illustrates the fact that on some respect it's oversimplification to focus on forest age, as it is merely one dimension of habitat, and there are many more dimensions to it and many factors affecting birds, not all of them related to forestry, and not all of them even related to Latvia. But in a while I will show you why it's still useful to see what is the forest age preferred by one or the other bird. And I just mentioned preference, but here you can see what habitats, what age forest birds use. Here you can see what forests they would rather use. So I presume most of you are familiar with a simple forage ratios, meaning that the species uses resource available in a higher proportion than it is available. So I calculated these forage ratios for the 21 species I showed you before, and here you can see that if given a chance, the many species would use the middle-aged forest as they do, but almost equally as many would use old-growth forests. And again, reminding you what are the increasing parts of forest stands. This is a part that is more than doubling, which is least important even for the common forest birds. And this is the part with slight increases, and this is a declining part. So as we see now, although the species would prefer older forests than younger one, and the younger one is the most increasing, at least for these common bird species, the trends don't match their preferences to forest age. However, one might want to consider what the future holds. And this is the reason why I decided it's justifiable to focus, at least in this case, only on forest age, because this is information that is available in different projections. Here, for example, is projected changes in age structure in the forest managed by Latvijas Valsts Meži, the main manager of state forests, and the author of this diagram is here. And as you can see at the very first glance, the trend is expected to continue. Each of these shows 5-year periods, so there are 20 of them in 100 years. The trend is expected to continue, that the old-growth forests will increase, the young forests will increase, and the middle part will decrease. And all of this, I presume, I'm pretty sure, within the current framework of forest legislation and policy. But this is what it means to the 21 species. if we look at the preferred habitat by them, most of them will lose the preferred habitat, which shouldn't be translated as a loss of total habitat, because as I showed before, they use also habitats that are suboptimal to them. So it shouldn't be translated as habitat loss altogether, but definitely as significant habitat degradation. And only a couple of them will gain habitat from that very much increasing young stands and not so much increasing older stands. And may I remind you again, these are the most common birds. These are not the old growth specialists, which are mainly of interest for nature conservation. In this list, you don't see black stork, capercaillie, and so on. And you might assume that, well, then at least these species that need old forests would benefit from these changes in age structure, which is not true. Because as you saw in the previous presentations, fragmentation is of crucial importance for these species, or it is a crucial negative factor affecting these species rather. So this forest age structure, although it will still keep the old growth part growing, it will hugely increase the fragmentation levels we see today. But as you could see before, the micro reserves alone won't do any good to the species we want to protect. So, having said that, and boring some of the organizers to sleep, I will move on to what should be done in the future. I would say that the forest policy that was adopted 20 years ago is still a relevant and useful document in respect that it aims at balancing all the interests of the forest management. However, we have to hugely rethink the way we implement this document, or rather we should start trying to implement it, at least the environmental part of it. And I would suggest we start by setting reasonable goals. This will be nothing new to most of you, but it somehow has slipped the attention of the people responsible for implementation of the forest policy, that normal goals which are included also in nature conservation legislation is not conservation of some current level of biodiversity, but reaching favorable conservation status of species and habitats. So this is obviously what we should aim at. And to know how we are doing, we should start implementing normal, comprehensive and purposeful monitoring of forest biodiversity, so that next time I try to speak about this, I don't have to stick together different data sources to show at least the few things we know. And I want to emphasize again that monitoring has to be purposeful. We have to understand why we collect the information we want to collect and what we will do in the end with it. And what was said before about land sharing and land sparing, it's obvious that we need both of the approaches, because if we go with land sharing, land sparing, building virtual fence around the protected forests, we will not be able to conserve the biodiversity if we are to keep the politically acceptable levels of strictly protected forests. Although we might protect some old growth forests, we may lose huge populations of birds that are dependent on middle-aged forests. So we definitely have to use that land sparing part and also land sharing. There has to be some forests that are simply untouched because there are nature values, mainly forest habitats, that there is no way of conserving if we want to do some timber management. So there have to be those forests with a virtual fence around them. But in the most forests, there has to be a way of considering the species that lives there when we think how much timber we can harvest and how to harvest timbers there. So I would propose promotion of continuous cover forestry while preserving old growth forests. And I emphasize both of these because on one hand, continuous cover forestry seems a nice thing to do, especially from social point of view where people don't like clear cuts. But at the same time, it can easily be used in a way that there are no more old trees where black stork can build nest or black woodpecker can excavate its hole for breeding. So we have to keep those old growth forests, but current forest management, which is based mainly on clear cutting, I would say is, at least in its current intensity, is not the way to go if we are truly committed in conserving biodiversity of forests. And the increase of logging intensity I showed in the graph before is within the law, and if we look at the timber production, it's also within the levels of sustainable forest management, meaning we are cutting less than the increment of forests. But as I hope I have showed you, but if I haven't, you can read the studies which shows that even managing forests sustainably from timber production of fuel can have huge negative impact on the biodiversity. So this should be considered when calculating the maximum allowed harvesting volume of forests. And maybe this maximum allowed volume should be calculated not only for state forests as it is now, but also for private forests. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions to Vestus, please? Seems no questions. Thank you. And now I have a question to everybody. According to the program, there is no more presentations, but it is written we can have a discussion. Are there any questions to lecturers left, presentations, or somebody would like to comment or to ask or so? Or we shall continue tomorrow in Forest, and after that at 4 o'clock again here for final conclusions. And tomorrow we shall try to look how to continue, how to improve our knowledge in what questions. So, is anybody who want to say something? If not, thank you very much. To be a very hard and long day, and please think about this information. And as I told, I will ask all presentations to give me in PDF format, and they will be available later after the symposium. So thank you and goodbye.